Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I'm here with another impromptu episode. I did one of these last week or the week before, and it really came out beautifully, so I'm trying it again today. Now, truth be told, today's been a little bit of a rough and rocky one for me. There's been some sort of life circumstantial things that have been bubbling up and percolating and causing some distress and some dysregulation, if you will. So it's been a constant sort of process today of trying to, relate to this disintegration. It is disintegration too, but dysregulation is what I meant to say. And so, the thing about the work that we talk about here on the podcast, the work that is broadly known as mindfulness is, more specifically, the way that we train our mind to be, to train the skills of focused attention, open awareness, and kind intention, right? Which then gives way to compassion and empathy and all the beautiful interpersonal skills that we talk about here. But anyway, the thing about this work is not about, it really is not about, attaining a certain state. Right. And I say that it's a little ironic because, yes, when we practice mindfulness, we do attain a certain state. Right. But it's not about attaining a state of, say, comfort. Right. Or something other than dysregulation, right? Because sometimes it's just, this is what's happening, right? And in fact, a lot of times most of the time when we're experiencing dysregulation or we're experiencing difficulty in our lives, there's no, like in order for us to get to a place of, oh, I'm okay now, really kind of requires bypass unless we allow ourselves to be discomforted or uncomfortable and dysregulated for a period of time. So really, it's not about attaining a state, a desired state of happiness or regulation or organization or something like that. It's more about observing the dysregulation and the disorganization and the unhappiness so that really ultimately so that we can learn from it. Right? Because when I'm rushing to try to fix it, right? I have one person who works with me who's always talking about the body chemistry, right? And I can do this to change my body chemistry and feel better, But when we're wrapped up with trying to find that answer and trying to fix it, well, we miss out on the really important thing, which is learning about ourselves through this experience, right? And that's where our sense of self can be expanded and sort of our understanding of ourselves can be deepened and ultimately our relationship to ourselves changes that way. And when we change our relationship to ourselves, we change our relationship to everything around us. And that's just the way it goes, And so today I wanted to talk about something specific because, number one, I've been, kind of struggling today, as I say, and this kind of arose within my own, healing and the context of my own journey of practice and everything else. So I want to share this with you. And so let's start very simply by right now, I want you to not think about a hippopotamus. Chances are every single one of you, for the briefest second, the briefest instant, a hippopotamus appeared in your mind, right? Even though the command or the instruction was to not think about the hippopotamus. Now, I say this to illustrate something very important about the way our minds work, right? Which is specifically to say the way that we handle the absence of something. And that is to say that we don't really handle the absence of something very well. Or I should say that what I mean by that is that we don't notice the absence of something, right? We notice malbehavior, inconvenient behavior, difficult behavior, meanness, unkindness, right? And we notice when we react to something, we notice that we're, we notice when we make a mistake, for instance, right? But we tend not to notice the absence of making mistakes. We tend to not notice the absence of even suffering or difficulty or behavior in response to something that would be a, sort of normal and usual response. And so this is very, very important, especially as we're going through a journey of healing and growth and kind of moving ourselves towards a place of well-being, right? Which doesn't always mean that we're happy, right? We can be well and be crying and really feel as though the world is falling apart around us for a temporary moment, right? It's okay to feel that, right? But now here's the thing. When we go into these places of dysregulation or trigger of our trauma and it could be attributed to anything, right? It could be as simple as not getting a great night's sleep or not eating enough or not hydrating enough or feeling some sort of, physical unwellness, right? Because as we know, the physical body, it encourages and promotes the story and the thoughts that arise in our mind, right? So if we're feeling uncomfortable and tired and maybe not well nourished or not well hydrated, then the physical attributes of those feelings are going to create thoughts and the storyline that is going to be more pessimistic, more catastrophizing, more self-critical and self sort of insulting, if you will. And critical and insulting of everyone else as well, right? I mean, that's kind of how it works. So it is, as outside, so is inside, right? And it's what's happening internally tends to happen externally as well, and vice versa, right? And so the idea then is, as I said a moment ago, right? Mindfulness is not about never feeling this way, because life happens, and there's no way that we can, insulate ourselves from that. I mean, some people can, I guess billionaires can. That's where, Tony Hsieh, the former CEO of the Zappos company, right? The online shoe store place, he calls sort of the most surface level happiness is rock star happiness, right? Because if you're a rock star, you have the money, the resources, the people, everything's all around you. So you can always just make yourself happy, right? But for most of us, that's not the case. And I would contend that even rock stars, there's something beyond that sort of superficial happiness, which is either, causing them to suffer or maybe they are reaching that deeper level of happiness, or maybe they're not, right? So anyway, I digress. The point is that when we go into these places of dysregulation, and again, this is especially true for all of us, for all of you who are listening, because I know that all of you are on a path towards healing and towards well-being and towards self-discovery and self-understanding through a compassionate, lens and a kind lens to ourselves. I know that is true about all of you because you listen to my content. And so when we are on this journey, as we are, cultivating the skills that help us to live in a more intentional and sort of grounded and accepting and adaptable way, there's going to be times along the way where we fall on our faces, where we just have a really crappy day. Now, here's the thing. When we're having that really crappy day, the feeling of crappiness is the same as it's always been, right? We're gonna feel again in our bodies, the tension and the sensations that we feel associated with this, negative state or, distress or depression or anxiety or whatever it is, right? The physical sensations are going to be exactly the same as they've always been. That doesn't change. That's you. That's the way that you process this stuff. Now, the thoughts and the story tend to be the same as well. And so then do the emotions, right? Because all these three things are connected to each other, as we've talked about so many times. And this is so important to recognize, right? Because we understand that the sensation of the body is creating the outlook, and the outlook is creating the emotions, and the emotions then are creating more of the sensation in our body. And so in a very real way, we're sort of on a ride with this when it gets to be a real heavy, very heavy and deep emotions that cause the tension in the body, and that cause the difficult thoughts, right? And this is when, of course, also, the intrusive thoughts are going to pop into our mind. I can't tell you how many times my father popped into my mind today, and I wish he would go away, right? But that's the thing, right? We recognize as we do this work, on the internal level, we recognize that this is not my doing, right? I did not, order this up last night so that this morning I would wake up in this state. I did not invite these intrusive thoughts. I did not ask for this tension or the emotions that cause it, right? This was not my doing. This is not something I'm intentionally making happen, right? And so when we recognize that, that's when we open ourselves up to something that's, again, maybe even, well, not again, but something that's maybe more important, which I bring back to the same, that question that I asked you, or that command that I gave you of don't think of a hippopotamus, right? Because here's the thing, when we're going through these moments of dysregulation, when we're going through these times of challenge and strife and difficulty, which we can't control the waves, right? We can't control what happens in the external world. And sometimes things happen that cause us to feel this way. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You didn't make a mistake. You didn't do something wrong. You didn't fail. It's just the way life is unfolding for you in this moment right now. But here's the thing. Because the feeling is always the same with this, because we tend to have that same familiar sensation, and we have that same familiar talk track. Oh, this is depression talk track. Here it is, and we have that same emotional response to the talk track, right? Again, that is you. That is who you are and how you process the world around you. And at a certain level, nothing can ever change that. I mean, yes, it evolves. Yes, it adapts. Yes, it flows into, sort of new versions of itself. Yes, that is true. But it's the essence and the very basic nature of it really doesn't change. How we respond to it and how we relate to it, that changes incredibly. And that is where the behavior comes from. Because when we are unintentional about it, when we lack a sort of detached observer view of all of this, the body, the emotions, the thoughts, right? When we lack that observer's view and we lack that detachment, and instead we're all tangled up in it, we're along for the ride with it, well, then our behavior is going to be a certain way. And generally speaking, it is what you've always done before, right? Like you get angry, you slam a door. You get sad, you cry. You get lonely, you call an ex-girlfriend, or whatever it is, right? That these are the behavioral things, or ex-boyfriend, I should say. But these are the behavioral responses that, or I really should call them reactions, right? Because these are automatic reflexive reactions for us that are motivated not by nothing more than unconscious habits. Now that's where it gets interesting. Because what we're doing in this training, as we're cultivating the skills of focused attention, open awareness, and kind intention with non-judging awareness, wrapping all of this up and cultivating the skills of acceptance and cultivating the skills of empathy and compassion. As we're doing all of this, again, what we're really changing is our relationship to the body, the emotions, the thoughts. Right? Which is to say that we are cultivating that detachment, that unbiased observer's role, to our experiences in the body, the emotions, the thoughts. And what that means is that we go from this automatic and this, reflexive reaction that we do every single time. Every time I've ever been depressed, I've done this, right? We go from those automatic reflexive reactions and we notice those things changing. And it's really, really important to understand that it's not like we are saying, oh, don't forget, you're not supposed to respond this way, right? Because that doesn't work. When you're in that trigger, when you've been triggered, I should say, you don't have access to those rational thoughts to say, oh, don't forget, don't forget what Art told you last week. That cognition is not available to you at that point. And that's why we always respond in the same way, because we're operating in a sort of, as Daniel Goleman would say, the low road of the brain, right? Which is just the completely reflexive and emotional responsive or emotional reactive ways of area of the brain. Which is to say the limbic area and everything that's sort of underneath the neocortex, for all the nerds out there who want to talk about the neuroscience, or neuroanatomy, I should say. And so when we're in that space, we're always going to do the unconscious thing, because that is not a conscious part of our brain. We cannot access that, or at least it's much more difficult to access that conscious and intentional part of our brain when we're in that state of trigger and dysregulation and disorganization. And so this is the important thing to understand, that never really changes. Right? When we're triggered, we're always going to do the sort of reactive and habitual thing. Now, getting back to you and me and all the other people listening to this podcast right now, which are people who are doing the work to train ourselves to cultivate intention, to cultivate non-judging awareness, to cultivate kindness, compassion, open awareness, all the stuff that we talk about. For us, there comes a time where we notice that our behavior is different. But that's why I asked you before, or that's why I asked you to not think of a hippopotamus. And you thought of a hippopotamus, because the thing is that we don't, readily and automatically recognize, hey, I just went through this really difficult time and I didn't slam a single door, and I didn't yell at anybody, and I didn't do those XYZ 10, 12 different things that I do that tend to cause more of the difficulty, right? Because once we respond in a certain way, that's now the reality, right? We don't get to rewind and say, oh, I just wasn't feeling well, so let me unslam the door, right? It doesn't work that way. You have slammed the door, and everyone around who heard the slamming of the door is going to respond to the slamming of the door because it happened, right? And so we don't readily notice those times as we're on this journey of healing and growth and moving towards the well-being and the skillfulness of the mind. We don't notice that we're not doing those things. And this is where it gets tricky, because remember, the feeling is the same as it's always been. So it has a tendency to feel like nothing has changed. And when we're doing the work, and when we're putting in the effort, and we're putting in the time, and we're putting in the intention, and we're listening to the podcast, and we're going to the classes, and we're doing the practices, and then we feel like nothing's changed, gosh, that could be one of the most discouraging things ever. That can really hurt when it happens. I mean, really hurt. And of course, it happens in that time where we're already wounded, right? It happens in the times of dysregulation, of depression, of anxiety, of whatever it is for you. And so it's going to have that catastrophized thought. We're going to think like, oh my gosh, all this time I've spent and nothing has changed. What a terrible person I am. What a horrible loser I am. And guess what? As soon as you say those words, you're going to have an emotional response to them. And then that emotional response is going to create the tension and the stress in the body that is going to then encourage you to say it again and to say even worse stuff about yourself. And so this is why it is super important to train ourselves to notice the absence. And this is a skill, just like any other skill. It can be trained through practice. Isn't that wonderful news? Isn't that exactly what you were hoping I was going to say? You knew I was going to say, because that's what I always say. But this is really important, folks, seriously, because again, as we go through life, this is always going to come up. Always. And now it's true that we respond in positive ways, the same thing, right? It's not just when things are in a negative way, right? Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that, because when things are in the negative, that's when we're really down in that lower brain kind of, when we're in a place of distress and we're feeling fear and stuff like that. So let's keep it in this realm. I mean, I'll talk about that other stuff another time. But the point is, the point that I was kind of moving towards there is that we should notice all of it. Right? That's the idea. It's not just about noticing the negative, but it's also about noticing the positive. But generally speaking, when something is positive, it's there, it's happening. It's a positive thing, not as opposed to like it's not like an absence of something, right? And so there we don't have trouble recognizing it. Right? Everybody, well, I mean, then again, it is important to recognize that when you're feeling really, really well in a given moment, right? When your body feels really super pleasant, that's worth noticing as well. Okay. But right now we're talking about, the negative aspects of our behavior, right? Because that's the thing that's really important. Again, it's all important, right? But I feel that this particular subject is important to talk about because, again, when we are triggered, that's when it seems so hopeless and so pessimistic and so, critical and catastrophizing. That's when we tend to, our mind runs away with itself. So now, how do we practice this? Or what is the practice? What are you talking about here, Art? Right? So what I'm talking about is training ourselves to notice the absence of behavior or the absence of a negative reality in our experience. And this brings me to a wonderful practice that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about or used to talk about a lot, right? And this is where it is a positive and negative thing. So the first step in this practice is when you wake up, right, every morning, and you can put a little Post-it on your, above your bed or put it on the bathroom mirror so you see it when you use the washroom or whatever, right? Because this in and of itself is a habit or a lack of a habit, right? Again, most of us don't do this, and there's no reason for us to do it. Right? And that's why it's not something that's hardwired into us, but it's one of the most helpful things we can do, especially in moments when we're feeling triggered. Okay? And so that is that we notice the absence of, the way Thich Nhat Hanh used to talk about it is the absence of a toothache. How many mornings do you wake up and you say, man, I don't have a toothache today? On the mornings where you wake up and you do have a toothache, there is nothing else happening in the whole world except your toothache, right? It is like a neon sign over everything in your life. You cannot even see your life without this toothache. How many times have you, it can even be like in a context of being ill, like having COVID, for instance, right? Like I remember when I had COVID the last, twice that I had it over the last few years, and I would feel in the middle of it like, oh my gosh, I'll never feel, as soon as I feel, as soon as I can breathe again, as soon as I stop coughing, I'll be happy again. And weeks go by and eventually you stop coughing and you don't sit there every morning and say, I'm not coughing from COVID, right? We just don't do it. And again, we don't do it because it's not really necessary. The survival part of the brain feels like that's wasted energy because the survival part of the brain doesn't care about whether you're progressing in your work or not progressing in your work, or whether it doesn't matter what you're feeling to the survival brain. The survival brain just wants you to keep breathing and the heart to keep beating. And it's a very myopic entity in our lives, and that's all it cares about. Literally all it cares about. Actually all that it cares about. And so we have to then cultivate this ability that even during the difficult times, we notice that we're not doing the typical automatic thing that we've always done. And this is where it gives us some hope and some promise and some optimism, right? Because we feel like, wait a second, as much as I'm feeling like horrible today, like I want to cry all day, but I haven't snapped at anyone today. I haven't slammed a door. I haven't, or maybe I did notice one little reaction, like I slammed the little door, but not as bad as I used to, right? Or I didn't yell at anybody. I only slammed the door, whatever that thing is for you. And again, it's really important to recognize that this is completely your experience. You either slam doors or don't slam doors per who you are. And nobody else is like you in this sense. Nobody is exactly the same as you in this sense. And so this is a completely, unique and subjective experience that we're talking about. And so you don't compare yourselves to others. You don't say like, oh man, I'm such a loser because I got upset and that person over there never gets upset, right? Because they're just dealing with it on a different level. Right? They just don't have the same habits that you do, but you can bet your bippy that there are times where they're struggling just like you're struggling right now. And so this practice becomes so valuable to just notice every morning. And when we do it first thing in the morning over and over and over, we start to recognize it throughout the day as well, right? Now, the other half of the practice that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about is first you recognize that, I don't have a toothache right now. And again, it doesn't just have to be a toothache. You can use anything, right? You can say, I don't have a backache. You can say, I don't have, indigestion. I don't feel bloated. I don't feel, I don't have an earache. I don't have a sty in my eye. I don't have pink eye. I don't have allergies. On and on goes the list. You use whatever feels right to you. But recognizing the absence of that something is very, very valuable. And then the other half of the practice is to express some gratitude for what you do have. And what you do have is, and again, this is a very specific practice, is you have 24 fresh hours now. And in those 24 hours is an opportunity to soothe yourself, to connect with others, to practice kindness, to practice open awareness, to practice focused attention. You have 24 fresh hours, fresh pack of 24 hours with which you can show up to life. You can become connected into your life and into everyone around you. And this, of course, this applies also when you do have a toothache, right? On the morning where you do have a toothache, you just say, wow, I do have a toothache today. But you know what? I don't have a broken leg. Or unless you do, then I don't have a broken arm. I don't, whatever it is, right? It's all about showing ourselves something other than the negativity that's flooding us. And again, this does not mean that we're bypassing anything, right? It doesn't mean that we're just like, oh, if I just tell myself everything's okay, everything's going to be fine, right? It's not that at all. It's not that at all. It's just giving ourselves a more balanced and a more full and a more clear view of our moment-by-moment experience. And of course, also it includes being able to see that progress, which is important. It's important that we're doing, and listen, we're not supposed to make a project of it, right? We're not supposed to have a goal of how our practice goes and stuff like that, because that works against the whole open awareness and the curiosity, right? But at the same time, if we do get the notion that nothing has changed, well, that can lead people to stop practicing altogether. And so we don't want that, because that is that is going to ultimately result in more of the negativity that we originally came to, or not, I shouldn't say more of the negativity, but more of the stress, more of the heavy emotions, more of the catastrophizing and pessimistic, thought track, right? And so it's not about, notching our belt and seeing, oh, look at what a great job I've done, but it's about saying, because without noticing the progress, it feels like it's all negative. And it's not. It's not all negative. It's also not no negative, but it's not all negative. Sorry, I'm just reading my notes here because, because I just wanted to make sure that I was covering everything. Yeah, sorry, I was just reading my notes here. But ultimately what happens here, right, is that we can also start, once we start noticing it within ourselves, right? Once we start noticing, again, this absence of negative behaviors as a result to the stress and the emotions and everything else that we're experiencing, which again includes things like depression and anxiety and all of it, right? As we notice the absence of these negative attributes of our behavior that are motivated by these emotional states, right? As we notice it more for ourselves, we start then noticing it for others. Right? We start then noticing that whether we're noticing the presence of the negative behavior, right? Or we're noticing perhaps the absence of the negative behavior. But either way, we get to see it in others the same way we see it in ourselves. Which is to say, as I opened this podcast about, or said early on in the podcast today, is that this person in front of me did not choose to be in this horrible mood this morning. Right? They didn't choose to feel the way that they feel, so that which motivates and promotes this behavior from them. This is not a conscious choice they made. They are lost. They are unmoored, and they are just being tossed around by the waves of their mind right now. And then that allows me to then respond differently and not meet fire with fire. Right? I can meet their struggle and their suffering with compassion and kindness rather than with anger and resentment. Yeah? Does that make sense? All right, I hope it does. Yeah. So anyway, I hope you found that helpful. I hope today, this was very impromptu. It felt really weird, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful. I hope you found it helpful. And again, it's just really, really important, and I just want to make this one last point because it's very important, right? Almost everybody who I ever have coached or taught this work to, including myself, has come back and said the same thing, that at some point they see themselves doing something in a circumstance where they would always do A, they are now doing B. But the important aspect of this is that they're noticing it not from a place of, conscious cognition, but rather like they're watching themselves go through it in a different way than they always do. And this is part of the that's like the open awareness part of this practice, right? That leads to that sort of what we call a third person detachment, where you really are watching yourself go through things because it's automatic, right? You are not intentionally doing the things. You never have intentionally done those things, but now you see yourself unintentionally doing something different. And folks, there's no more exciting moment than that. I promise you. Ooh, that is so good. And many of you have probably already experienced this. If you're doing the practices every day, I'm sure you have. Just like I have, and just like so many of the people I've worked with. And so again, this indicates that it's still automatic, right? Because it's not like I'm saying, oh man, watch the way you're responding to things. I'm just noticing myself respond differently. And so it's still automatic. It's just a new automatic. And that's where it gets really exciting. All right, folks. Well, thanks again. I appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed this episode today. I know I enjoyed delivering it. I do want to say that, given the state of my emotional and physical and mental, sort of disruption today and chaos and really feeling unsettled all day, I didn't think I could feel this positive right now, right? And I want to just indicate to you that this is important, right? Because we always talk about this, right? We say that integration made visible, to quote Dan Siegel, is kindness and compassion. But as I always point out to you, that Dan Siegel also says that or he agreed with me, quite frankly, but he says that, or I said, and he agreed that not only is integration made visible kindness and compassion, meaning that from an integrated state, we produce naturally kindness and compassion, but also that kindness and compassion promote integration. Because I have not felt so integrated all day today. I promise you that. And that is because I'm committing an act of kindness here and compassion, right? And connection. I'm connecting to you, and that is bringing myself a sense of well-being. All right, so I wanted to point that out to you. All right, everybody. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that, when I get into these states of dysregulation and turmoil and chaos and stuff, it's almost always true that the beautiful ideas for podcast episodes and teaching come out in these moments for me. And so I have been just feverishly scribbling today, all kinds of ideas for content coming up. And so I'm really looking forward to the next few days to share some really, really beautiful content with you on this podcast. And I hope that you enjoy it. All right, everybody. Thanks again. I wish you well, and I'll be back again soon. Probably tomorrow, but we'll see. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.